This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK. This is the BBC.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Movies That Made Me. My name's Ali Plum, and you're about to hear a conversation with me and Christopher Nolan, the visionary director, producer, writer, and so much more of such incredible films as Interstellar, Inception, The Prestige, Memento, the Dark Knight trilogy. He is a visionary, an incredible artist, and it was my honour to speak to him. So please do enjoy this interview with him I enjoyed just a few months ago in honour of his films being re-released in super high-def mega edition. That's not really the technical term, but please forgive me. It really was an honour. So please, enjoy. Chris, welcome to Movies That Made Me.
Thank you.
I am going to start with a couple of films that quite a few people have watched. I think they're called the Dark Knight trilogy. And I want to ask that basic question I'm sure you've been asked many, many times, but how did this first come about for you? What was your pitch?
Well, my pitch was Batman had been made very brilliantly by Tim Burton as a very Tim Burton film. But the thing that had never been addressed was the more realistic telling, the origin story. How does he become Batman, that kind of thing. It hadn't actually been addressed particularly in the comics in detail. There was a bit of a gap in pop culture, which was a really exciting opportunity. So my pitch was, at the time, let's treat this with some sense of reality, more like, not so much a comic book movie as an action film, just a sort of great origin story with a mythology and a lot of action and really the idea of an extraordinary character in an ordinary world. Rather than, what Tim had done was this very extraordinary world where Batman sort of made sense. We wanted to have kind of the Dick Donner treatment, where it's like you've got a relatively ordinary, recognizable reality and then this extraordinary figure in the middle of it.
Now, with 3 films, that's a lot of your life there, but what are your fondest memories of making those movies?
Oh my gosh, it's 10 years of my life and so many great things. So much fun. Designing the Batmobile, Nathan Crowley, my designer, and myself, we did it in my garage. We just airfix kits and just gluing stuff together, and then eventually came up with a version that we thought was great, and then just handing it over to the special effects guys and saying, can you build this from the ground up? It was just a kid's dream come true. It was so much fun. So many different things and so many great people. Christian and Gary and Michael, and the cast was just so amazing. So many good memories.
Now, one of my favourite bits of all of those movies is Heath Ledger's sardonic clap. And I gather that was actually him doing that. That was his own idea. Oh, yeah.
A lot of what Heath did, he would discuss with me, but he'd sort of give me hints about what he was going to do. And we'd talk about it a bit, and I would try and be an audience for him or sort of gauge with him, what he was doing. But a lot of it was about unpredictability. And I think he wanted to play his cards a little closer to the chest. So he would very gradually reveal to me the voice and the way, he was going to do things and all the rest, but not in one go, like, oh, here's the Joker. We watched him sort of develop it with the wardrobe and the makeup and everything. And kind of, I got to be a part of that creative process, which was great fun. But on set, there were always moments like that clapping or things he would do with his voice. His voice was so unpredictable. He created this bizarre pitch that I've seen a lot of people try to imitate since, but you never quite knew whether he was going to go high or whether he was going to go low. You never knew what that guy was going to do, and that was what was terrifying about him.
Now, what did it mean to you for him to win his posthumous Oscar? Was that something you took a great pride in?
I took huge pride in having been in any way involved with this great performer and this legacy. He was an extraordinary person, an extraordinary actor, and for him to be recognized in that way, I think it was very meaningful for his family and meaningful, I think, for film history, that what he contributed, and he contributed in many different ways to film history, but that it be marked in that way. I was very proud to have been a part of that.
What was it like for you, from your perspective, when the whole "in Nolan we trust" thing happened? Because I thought of you personally going, everyone seems to be it was on T-shirts and mugs.
I don't pay a lot of attention to that stuff, to be perfectly honest. I think actually when you're working in such a public arena, when you're working on a beloved character and you're trying to put your own spin on it, and when we were doing the Dark Knight trilogy, there was a real expectation that we do something that we thought was great, that we don't try to serve an existing interpretation of the character, that we come up with something new and something different. And the only way to do that is to insulate yourself from the chatter, from the sort of, a lot of the stuff online. You can't really, I suppose you go one of two ways. There are filmmakers who embrace that and engage with that in a dialogue. I always felt the only way that I could feel free as a creative force was to ignore that stuff altogether.
Now, there are certain lines from your films that have taken on a life of their own. And for whatever reason, I see this one a lot from Inception, is you mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling. I don't know why. People just love it. Do you enjoy when you do catch a glimpse of the public really responding to your movies? Does that really fill you with joy?
Oh, yeah, it's tremendous. Particularly if it's a line or a snatch of dialogue or something. Because I write as well, as a writer, to hear somebody quote your line or something, that's, very, very exciting. Maybe not so much when Donald Trump's quoting Bane or whatever, but it goes in different directions. But, it's to feel that you've had an effect on the culture, on pop culture at least. That's a great thrill, definitely.
Inception is one of my favourite films of yours, and I have watched that documentary about how you pulled off the series of set pieces in that a number of times. And I've always wanted to ask you, did you ever feel like you'd bitten off more than you could chew? Because when you have the vertical twisting corridor and the horizontal twisting corridor, did you look at it on set and go, what is this? Are we doing this?
Oh yeah, very much. I feel as a filmmaker, I've always felt that if you have a level of success with a project, it buys you a bit of freedom for the next one. And when we did Inception, we were coming off the success of The Dark Knight, which was considerable. So there was a lot of trust from the studio. And I think all my collaborators, Emma, my producer and wife, all the heads of department I was working with, who I've worked with for years, we really felt like, okay, we've been given a little freedom here that other filmmakers don't get given very often. So we've got to do something with it. We've got to really push it out there, really try and do something extraordinary. And that drove us all to really be bold and try things. And so you absolutely have moments like, Cardington, which was this big Zeppelin hangar, airship hangar, where we built these standing sets. We had sets standing there for 8 or 9 years. And, I remember my dad coming to visit it and saying it's like the world's biggest toy box or something. It just had all of these incredible sets in there. And we built this corridor that could rotate, and the vertical version of it as well at another point. And then we had the hotel room that was on its own whole spinning thing, and you would, walk across to this massive set and over to that massive set. And, it was a really thrilling set of circumstances that we got to make that film under. And I think we're all just really relieved that it didn't turn out to be one where we had a lot of fun making it and not much, people didn't have fun watching it. Luckily, it satisfied the audience as well, so it was best of both worlds.
I love the sequence where you have the fake train, actually a truck, going through the cars and realising that it was daylight, and you went, no, I want it to rain as well, and the complicated blocking of the sunlight.
Oh, yeah.
All this complicated stuff that you just take for granted.
Yes, I would, knowing we had to shoot that in downtown LA, and Wally Pfister, my director of photography, on that and so many of the other films, was very worried about that. So every time, for months before we shot that sequence, every time it would rain, because we were shooting in England first, it would rain but the sun would be out, I would call him up and say, look, you can have sun with rain, sometimes it's okay, and he'd go, yeah, whatever. And in the end, he and his team, they came up with some pretty great ways of blocking out the sun, and we tried to schedule it in such a way that we could make that work. But the special effects guys had the real burden, which was to make, it was about 4 city blocks rain at the same time. And it was really amazing to stand in the middle of it and cue the rain. And it would just be falling for streets and streets, and it was really, really remarkable.
And I love seeing how the special effects guys tweak your practical effects. So when the cafe explodes, the explosions within the explosions. Did that film, in your mind, finish the way you hoped it would? Because obviously, in your mind, it looks the way you dream it would be, no pun intended. Did that film land the way you wanted it to?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I think it did. It was interesting from a visual point of view, though, because I wrote things into the script that I didn't know what they would look like. And I don't usually do that, but in the case of Inception, I wrote things like the city folding over on itself. I wrote it as a narrative piece of the script without a clear idea of how we would do that or what it would even really look like. It was more of a story idea that you would be able to manipulate architecture in the city and fold over whatever. But I had never seen... I didn't have an analogy in another film. Very often you're just drawing on things you've seen in other films and trying to change them or add to them. With that one, it was whole cloth. It was an idea. It was like, no, I've never seen this before, and I want to try and do it. And then you're engaging your heads of department, your visual effects guys, your Paul Franklin in that film, and they're just having to come up with something from nothing. And that's when it gets really exciting. When they show you something, they're like, okay, it could look like this, and you go, okay, I'd pay $10 to see that or whatever. You know?
Now, jumping to Interstellar, now that film has, been in the cinemas, people are aware of what it is, I'd love to talk to you about Matt Damon, because I saw the film maybe the third time and thought there must have been a real delight for you pulling that trick with him, because not only was he hidden, but he's so well known for being the nice guy.
Yeah.
And to have him being such a despicable piece of work. Did he talk to you about that on set?
I don't think we ever really talked about it that much because he's not a self-conscious performer. He saw the character for what it was and completely got it. It didn't require much discussion. He's a guy of great integrity himself, but he also is able to portray great integrity and is very aware of that. And what he understood from the script and what we did talk about is Dr. Mann, this is a guy who is absolutely convinced of what he believes. And so that integrity works. It's not an act. He really believes it. And that scene where he's explaining that they're going to be the last human beings, he really believes it. And the turn is all about cowardice. Yes. And that we talked about a lot. It's like, okay, there's revealing this truly reprehensible degree of cowardice that's very human and very relatable, but depressing to see and awful to see. And I don't think he really got his due for how much he really pulled that off.
I agree with that. I've seen footage of how you strapped cameras to the backs of people to get the shots you wanted in Interstellar whilst they were in those rigs. Yeah. Again, was that an odd moment going, yeah, this is my day-to-day? I'm strapping an IMAX to the back of someone?
Well, yeah. I mean, Hoyter and I talked about how do you exploit the language of the GoPro camera that everybody's so familiar with, with an IMAX camera. And it's not very easy, it turns out, because the thing weighs 60 pounds, but you strap it to someone's back or their shoulder or whatever. Find ways to do that. Yes, that was challenging and tricky, but our feeling was always, the quality you get from those cameras. If we could put that camera in that position, and Dunkirk, obviously with the aerial sequences, is very much the case. It's like if you can get that camera in that place, the image quality you get from it is incredible. So, it's very immersive.
Would you say Interstellar, and this is obviously very subjective, is your most personal film?
I think they're all personal, honestly. I think they all have strong elements of personal connection with me. I think Interstellar was probably the one where that was the most conscious, I suppose, because I have children, I have a daughter. The film's very much a film about the relationship between a father and a daughter. So there were very clear connections with me. But I can't really make a film unless, on some level, I'm very personally and emotionally involved with it.
The sequence with the docking sequence, I suppose I should call it, is spectacular. How did that look before? Because obviously you try to have physical effects for the most part and then tweak it with CGI.
Yeah.
Would that be your most CGI-led moment in your career?
No, not at all. I mean, there are CG shots, but when we were shooting that sequence, you know, we had a spinning dock. We had a spaceship trying to dock with it full size, and I was controlling the spaceship and guiding. You know, we have the camera underneath and guiding it and literally docking it like it was a full-size spaceship.
And you were controlling it?
Yeah, no, I was controlling that. You know, it was. We did it all sort of full size. And so when Matthew's in the cockpit, you know, looking up through the window and he's looking up at the spinning dock, I mean, that was there. That was all real. And so, yes, everything is enhanced with CG and expanded out. And I think Paul Franklin and his team did a very brilliant job doing it. But as far as fully CG shots, there are only a couple in that sequence. Everything was. And there's a lot of miniature work as well. So when we were editing it, we had real things, real shots to cut with. There were only a couple of fully CG shots in that entire sequence.
I mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, I guess.
Exactly.
Jumping to Dunkirk, and obviously Radio 1, I've got to ask that question that you've been asked again a million times, but you must be so pleased with how the Harry Styles things played out, because people were like, come off it, and then went, actually, he's really good.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, but it's funny because you get asked whether I was surprised by that or whatever, and you go, well, no, that's my job. You know, my job is to figure out, is to meet someone, audition them, look at them, and you know, figure out what they can do. And so ultimately, I wasn't surprised by it at all. But I was very pleased by people's reaction to what Harry did, because I think that he risked being almost too subtle or too, you know, he's very, very real in what he does in the film, which is what I wanted. It's very truthful, but it's not glamorous, and it's not, you know, he's not an exotic villain. There's nothing obvious that he gets to do. It's really, not unlike Matt Damon's character, actually, in Interstellar, we were talking about earlier. You're playing human frailty. You're playing an ugly side of human nature that we all are very, very aware of in ourselves. And that's very, very unglamorous. And he's just a very talented guy. He did a terrific job. I always like to have faith that the work, you know, if somebody does a great job, that people, when they sit down in the cinema and the lights go down, that they're invested in that world for a couple of hours, that they're going to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Now, you've been joking about this a little bit before, but have you been eyeing up any more masks for Tom Hardy to wear?
Yeah. It's interesting how that's, I mean, between that and, because Tom's totally happy to wear a mask. He's like, great, you know, if he can act with one eye, you know, that's an interesting challenge to him. But Cillian Murphy, there was one film, I think it was this film I called him up and said, you know, would you come and do a part? He said, well, do I have to wear a bag over my head? He pointed out to me, I'd done 3 films for him to wear a bag over his head. It's like, okay, fair point. Let's stop putting a bag on Cillian's head. In fact, it made him he had to wear a bag over his head underwater in Inception. It's like, that was a little harsh, but, you know, he's a good sport.
Particularly when he's got such piercing eyes. I mean, he put a bag over him. Now, there is such little dialogue in this film, and you mentioned that it's quite unglamorous. Were there times where you felt that you were just watching people suffer? Your day would be seeing Harry Styles, others, be miserable.
Certainly the first couple of weeks of shooting, we had really appalling weather. And I think everybody involved thought we would shut down, except my director of photography and myself, because we knew that that's what we needed. That's how we were going to get the right imagery. And so this industrial beach over in Dunkirk, where this amazing foam kind of washed up on the beach because of the weather, and just watching the guys out in that, just sort of suffering. But that's, in a way, when you don't have the dialogue to tell the story and you're doing it primarily visually, it was a gift, because that's exactly what we needed. We needed to show passage of time. We needed to show the extremity of it, the boredom of it, and how unpleasant the circumstances were. And so, you know, putting them through some unpleasant circumstances like that was very necessary, I think.
Would you like to admit that the real reason why you did Dunkirk was for the opportunity to fly in a Spitfire? Because that would have been my reason. You
know, I've always wanted to fly in a Spitfire, and I got to do that on this film, and it really was an incredible thrill. I highly recommend it. No, I think the airplanes were... It's funny, my grandfather was in the Royal Air Force and he died in World War II, and my father was very, very interested in aviation, airplanes and everything, and I think the aerial component of the film was certainly, always felt to me like a very necessary part of creating the excitement in the film, because there's a lot of misery and intensity to these guys on the beach and their story, and being on the boat, coming over through the weather and all that. It always felt to me that the aerial component was where we got to have some very, very visceral excitement, hopefully frightening and realistic and whatever, but unquestionably exciting.
For sure. And I would love to talk to you about the ending, but I think it's still too soon.
I think it's too soon.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions, which hopefully won't take too long, just to wrap things up. Now, this isn't a joke, but what have been your movie mementos over your career? And you can include something from Memento.
Oh, you're talking about actual objects?
Yes. What do you, after you make all of this?
Yes.
What actually makes it home?
Well, I'm not sure I should answer this question, because I think probably the studio owns various of the things that I've got hidden away. I do have a couple of masks from The Dark Knight, from the heist sequence, and I have a couch from Memento, weirdly. I have the couch that was in Carrie Ann Moss's living room, and that's sitting in my house. I don't know how or why. You do wind up with odd stuff. And every now and again I'll open a drawer in the house and I'll find a Polaroid from Memento, with a thing written on it or whatever, that I just happen to have chucked in a drawer. But I'm not a big souvenir collector, to be honest. I don't have a sort of, we do have some of the miniatures from Interstellar, which is cool, and some of the concept models we built, things like that. And
what do fans say to you in the street when they spot you?
It's always different. The really gratifying thing about, when people will come up and talk to you about the work, it's exciting that somebody's been moved by something that you've done and inspired by it. What I take pride in is it's very often a different movie. I get people coming up and saying stuff about The Dark Knight, or stuff about Memento, or stuff about Inception, or Interstellar more recently. That makes me very proud that there are different movies that people might choose to talk about. That's a fun thing.
Yes, I'm sure a few years ago, before I got this job, I might have tried to talk to you about all of them at once, and it would have been very confusing. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
BBC Radio 1.
That was a Movies That Made Me podcast. You can see the film versions of these interviews on BBC iPlayer. And also, if you're into podcasts, and chances are you are, why not check out my other one, the Radio 1 Movies with Ali Plum podcast, which features all of the week's movie news and reviews, as well as interviews with some of the world's biggest stars.
Benedict, what do fans most often say to you on the street?
Hello.
Endless good conversations to have. Just an A+ cast.
What is the Dev Patel script these days?
I go out for a lot of roles with Jason Statham.
Hugh Jackman spoon-fed me in Paris about a year ago.
Would you like a little bit of mealful? Little bit of mealful?
Say, man, got a joint? And then I'll go, be a lot cooler if you did.
Download it from bbc.co.uk/podcasts or the iPlayer radio app around the planet. Thank you for listening.
This is the BBC.